Greetings to my dear guests on this video. I wish you a pleasant viewing and look forward to your feedback in the comments. The first thing I noticed that morning was the silence. Not the usual hush of a focused workplace, but something different. Heavier. Like the quiet that settles over a room just after someone leaves it mid-sentence. I stepped off the elevator and onto the 32nd floor of Maven Tech Global, heels clicking against the marble tiles, and instantly sensed it. An absence. Not of sound, but of presence. No chatter at the espresso bar, no impromptu syncs in the breakout lounge. Even the receptionist, usually half buried in a rotating sea of onboarding packets, was gone. Her desk lamp glowed, but her chair was empty. The air felt oddly thick, like it knew what I didn't yet. My office door was ajar. Strange. I always closed it before leaving. When I pushed it open, I saw it immediately, the envelope. Placed dead center on my glass desk, pristine and glowing under the overhead light, its corners sharp and deliberate. White, stark, surgical. There was no note, no greeting, not even a sticky tab saying Rose. But I knew it was for me. There was something too intentional about the way it waited. I crossed the room slowly. My eyes darted to my nameplate, still there. Rose Taylor, Head of Strategic Integration. I'd fought for that title, built it, defended it. And yet, somehow, I already knew what I was about to read would make that little plaque a relic. The envelope was heavier than I expected. I broke the seal with steady fingers, unfolded the single sheet inside. Effective immediately. Your position has been reassigned to Assistant Strategic Operations. Your compensation has been adjusted accordingly. A revised contract will be made available via Workday. Please coordinate with HR regarding your new role. At the bottom, 2 signatures. Dylan Mercer, CEO. Ben Callahan, Director of Strategic Modernization. A 55% salary cut. Demoted to Assistant. After 9 years, 3 restructurings, 2 mergers, and a record-breaking deal just last quarter, this was what I got. I didn't sit. I didn't drop the letter. I just stood there, letting the words drill into me. Each syllable was a cold slap, sterile and practiced. Not a single thank you, not even a phone call, just this letter, this reclassification, like I was a mislabeled file they had finally decided to shove into archive. Inside me, something buzzed. Not panic, not anger, not yet. It was quieter, colder, the sort of stillness that settles in just before a storm hits. I scanned the room like I might find an explanation in the corners. My awards still gleamed on the bookshelf. A mug from last year's Zurich summit sat half full near the monitor, and next to the window, a tiny cactus I'd named Atlas leaned toward the morning light. It looked like it had grown since I last watered it. Everything felt so painfully normal, as if nothing had changed, as if I hadn't changed, but everything had. There was a sound, heels down the hall. A laugh I recognized. Ben. Of course. I heard him say something about cleaning house for the next chapter before his voice vanished around the corner. I stood completely still. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I didn't even curse. I just remembered. Because this wasn't the first time I'd seen power masquerade as progress. I'd watched younger, cheaper, louder men come in with their disruption buzzwords and charisma polished in incubator labs. Dylan had used all the right terms in his last quarterly address. Agile, synergized, forward-leaning. I should have known. But they'd forgotten something. I didn't just manage systems. I built them. Every module of Maven Tech's cross-border data integration pipeline, every node in our global logistics overlay, every licensing agreement with our most sensitive tech partners. I had touched, reviewed, and architected it. Including Verdaxis. The Verdaxis deal. $2.4 billion. The one that made the financial press salivate and the board erupt in applause. That deal had a clause. A small, forgotten clause buried deep in the technical compliance schedule. 12.7b, line 4, in the confidential annex. A clause that stated, Principal architect reserves security activation rights in the event of involuntary reassignment or removal from active role in system governance. System-wide access will be locked pending audit. And I was that principal architect. That clause had just been triggered, not by rage, not by vengeance, but by design. Quiet, methodical, legal. I turned slowly to my terminal, entered the code, a short string of numbers, a confirmation prompt, and then access status restricted. System lockout initiated. It would take them hours to realize what happened. By then, the Verdaxis dashboard would be frozen. User logins disabled. Data pipelines inactive. The $2.4 billion deal vanished in a puff of procedural smoke. I stepped back from the desk and smoothed my blazer. I was no longer a director, but they had no idea how dangerous that made me. I don't know how long I stood there after triggering the clause. The silence in the office had changed. It no longer wrapped around me like a vacuum. It pressed in. Smothering. The kind of silence that follows a gunshot. Final. Unmistakable. I knew what came next. I left the office, the one that used to be mine, without a word. The elevator dinged too brightly. I stepped in, alone, and pressed the button for the 19th floor. That's where the support teams were. Shared pods. No windows. No names on the walls. No titles. The ride down felt longer than it should have. Every floor we passed reminded me of something I had built. 8th, where we onboarded Verdaxis' European team. 14th, the compliance war room I used to command during the Axiom breach. I'd fought to keep this company whole, and now they were gutting me like I'd never been here. When the doors opened, I stepped into a hallway I hadn't walked in years. This was where they put the interns, the floaters, the overlooked. There was a cubicle waiting. My name wasn't on it. There was no placard, no framed achievements, no standing desk. Just a battered beige chair with stuffing poking from the seam, a dusty monitor, and a sticky note slapped onto the screen. "It will set you up by EOD. R. Probably Rachel from operations. She'd onboarded half the building, but never once looked anyone over 30 in the eye. The drawers were empty, except for a cracked plastic pen and a phone cord coiled like a noose. No actual phone. Just the cord, left there as if to remind me of something I no longer had access to. I sat. The seat wobbled. The light above buzzed and flickered. There was a faint smell of toner and lemon disinfectant, fresh enough to sting the nose, like someone had tried to clean up too fast, like they were washing away the scent of who I used to be. I turned my head, and that's when I saw it. The wall behind me. Freshly laminated, framed. The new organizational chart. At the top, Dylan Mercer, CEO. Below him, a waterfall of clean lines, glossy portraits, and crisp titles. Chief Strategy Officer, Ben Callahan. Director of Integration, Lolita Renee. My name wasn't on it. Not in the footnotes. Not even in the special projects box they used to create when they didn't know what else to do with someone. I was gone. And there was Lolita, my replacement. A name I recognized. She'd been here 6 months, ambitious, quick with buzzwords. Friendly, in that overly rehearsed way people are when they're already climbing over you. I stared at her face in the little frame on the chart. Polished, glowing, confident. Underneath, the tagline, driving the next era of strategic clarity. Clarity, as if I had been chaos. My chest tightened. I felt it rise, not rage, not even sadness at first, but a kind of disbelief so deep it scraped something inside me raw. They hadn't just reassigned me. They had erased me. Every project I had birthed, every late night, every metric I'd exceeded, wiped clean. The polished glass of my old office was now Lolita's. My team, my tools, my reputation, all airbrushed out of the record like I'd been a mistake they could quietly correct. I reached into my bag and pulled out my badge. It still read, Rose Taylor, Strategic Integration. A joke now. A ghost of a title. For a second, I almost cried. Almost. But instead, I sat straighter. I folded the badge and tucked it into the bottom drawer. A keepsake, not of who I was, but of what they thought they could take. because sadness is heavy, but silence? Silence is sharp. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't knock on Dylan's door or send a bitter email to HR. Instead, I opened my laptop. Not the company-issued one, my own. The one with no logo, no tether. And slowly, I began to map out what came next. They had erased me from their version of the story, but I had already written a different ending. And this time, I was the author, editor, and architect. I closed the drawer gently. It was the only motion I could trust myself with in that moment. Any more, and something in me might shatter. I stared at the flickering light above me, blinking slowly as if I could time my breath with its erratic pulse. It didn't help. The silence was still thick, clinging to the walls like cobwebs. My fingers hovered over the keys of my personal laptop, not typing yet, just remembering. 8 months. That's how long I'd worked on the Verdaxis deal. I remember the first call. Midnight in Zurich. Rain outside, the kind that turns glass into a blur of neon and regret. Their head of integration sounded skeptical, tired, and on the verge of pulling the plug. "We've been burned before," he said, voice thin through static. "We want a deal that doesn't collapse the minute someone gets promoted." I told him I'd be there from first draft to final wire transfer. And I meant it. 8 months of late nights, time zone juggling, contract rewrites, performance modeling, disaster simulations. I wasn't just part of the deal, I was the deal. I could trace every clause in that document back to a moment. A call, a flight, a breakdown. Clause 67.1, Dynamic Load Distribution Compliance. Drafted after their CTO raised hell over our failover protocols during a week where I had strep throat and 3 overlapping deadlines. Clause 29.4, Multilingual Service Level Guarantees. Created during a layover in Abu Dhabi, where I translated the entire onboarding spec into French after their regional director nearly walked. Clause 81.3, GDPR plus layer coverage. I wrote that after a 2 a.m. wake-up call from legal in Brussels. But it was Clause 94.7c that mattered most. No one else even knew it was there. It was nestled in the redundancy appendix, a dry little section most execs skimmed over because it looked like insurance language. But buried in that dense text, dressed up in legalese and operational terminology, was my escape hatch, my line in the sand. In the event that the primary architect of the integration, as defined by Project ID RTX1, is removed from active implementation oversight, access to the Verdaxis interoperability layer shall be suspended pending compliance review and identity verification. Simple, unassuming, airtight, RTX1. That wasn't just a project ID, it was my ID, Rose Taylor. The metadata in the project documentation linked me directly to the role of primary architect. That clause didn't say my name, but the backend did. The system knew, and now that I was officially reassigned, it was live. I leaned back in the chair, letting that thought sink in. The sadness was still there, like a bruise I hadn't fully acknowledged, but under it, quiet and electric, was something else. Hope. They thought they had erased me. But they didn't read everything. They'd rushed the sign-off. Dylan had delegated the review to Ben. Ben, who barely skimmed anything that wasn't color-coded. Lolita wouldn't have known where to look. The annexes were long, the language dense. And me? I'd made sure the clause was subtle. It didn't scream. It whispered. The system would recognize my removal. And in less than 24 hours, it would start asking questions. Access would freeze. The Verdaxis interface would lock down. The dashboard would display a compliance warning no one knew how to dismiss. Not without the key. And I was the key. I let myself smile for the first time in hours. It wasn't a grin, just a small, quiet curve of satisfaction. They thought I had nothing left, but I still held the heart of their biggest deal, and they didn't even know it was beating in my hand. Vienna had always felt like a city caught between centuries. That night, it felt like it belonged to me. The rain had let up just as I stepped out of the cab, leaving the sidewalks damp and shining like mirrors. The restaurant was tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop, the kind of old-world bistro that didn't need to advertise. It simply existed, passed between whispered recommendations from people who knew good things when they saw them. Inside, it was quiet. No ambient music, just the soft murmur of diners and the clink of real silverware. Candlelight flickered off polished wood and ivory linens. I was early by 2 minutes. He was already there. Christophe Devane, CEO of Verdaxis International, an executive with the demeanor of a diplomat and the memory of a chess grandmaster. Always impeccably dressed, always measured. He stood when I approached, buttoning his blazer out of habit, and offered his hand. "Rose," he said, and it sounded like relief. "Christophe," I replied, shaking his hand. "Thank you for the invitation." "Thank you for accepting." We sat. No menus. He had already ordered wine for both of us, Syrah, dark and velvety. He poured it himself, then lifted his glass, not to toast, just to pause. "Let's skip the pleasantries tonight," he said gently. "I didn't bring you here to talk shop. Not exactly. That alone told me this was different. Christophe didn't waste words or invitations. If he wanted a dinner, it meant something." I nodded slowly. "I'm listening." He looked at me for a long moment. "We're going to sign the deal." I blinked, my fingers tightening slightly on the stem of my glass. "You're sure?" "We're sure." He took a sip, then set his glass down. "But not because of Maventech." I hesitated. "Excuse me?" "I'm signing this deal because of you." I sat back slightly. The words didn't sting, they stunned. He didn't say it like it was a compliment. He said it like it was a fact, like gravity. "You're the reason we're here," he said simply. "Not your CEO, not your CTO, you. Every deadline met, every red flag handled before it caught flame, every hard conversation reframed into a solution. You made this possible." "I appreciate that," I said carefully, a bit too automatically. "Do you?" I looked at him. He wasn't being difficult. He was being honest. He leaned forward, resting his elbows gently on the edge of the table. "Rose, I've been doing this for 27 years. I've dealt with American firms that sent me decks with spelling errors. I've been lied to by founders who didn't understand their own architecture. You're different." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to me. I opened it. It was a printed page from our first call's meeting transcript, highlighted. The highlight was my voice, near the end. "We won't just give you a system. We'll give you continuity, and I will personally see that through." I stared at the words. I remembered saying them, but I didn't remember them being recorded. "You were the first person who didn't sell us hype," Christophe said quietly. "You sold us reliability, and then you delivered it, piece by piece. That's rare." I blinked once, hard. He continued, "And that's why I had to see you tonight, off the record, away from the press releases and LinkedIn banners. I wanted to tell you this face to face. If you're ever not with Maventech, we'll want to know where you are." That stopped me cold. "I'm not threatening the contract," he clarified, "but I want to be clear about our loyalty. It's to you, Rose, the human being, not the logo behind you." I was silent. Not because I didn't have thoughts, but because I had too many. They ran over each other, collided, spilled. I'd spent the last few days trying to remember who I was without my title. And now this man, who had no reason to be anything but professional, was reminding me. "Thank you," I said finally. "That means more than you probably realize." He smiled. "Oh, I realize. You carry weight in rooms where others just speak." Our food arrived, duck confit for him, sea bass for me. But it might as well have been empty plates. The most important thing had already been exchanged. When the check came, Christophe insisted on covering it. "A closing gesture," he said with a wink. We stepped outside together. The rain had stopped. The air smelled like stone and history. I pulled my coat tighter, and for a moment we stood under the awning in silence. Before we parted, He turned to me. "If you disappear from this deal, Rose, we do too. That's not politics, that's principle." I nodded once. He walked off into the Vienna night, and I stood there, heart full and strangely light. Not because I'd won something, but because, for the first time in a long time, I'd been seen, not as a title or a department, but as myself. And that couldn't be erased. Monday morning arrived with surgical precision. I was at the office before the sun had fully claimed the skyline, before the elevators echoed with casual greetings or the vending machine groaned out its first coffee pod. The building was still stretching awake, but I was already inside, already seated. The flickering overhead light above my cubicle had been fixed. The phone still hadn't arrived. My name still wasn't anywhere. But I was here. The moment the elevator doors opened on the 19th floor and the others began trickling in, first the marketing coordinator, then the finance junior, then Ben himself, I felt it. The ripple of confusion. They didn't expect me. No one said it aloud, but I saw it in the staggered steps, the averted gazes, the awkward half-smiles that died too quickly. I didn't greet them. I didn't nod. I typed, one keystroke after another, calm and deliberate. I didn't open Slack, didn't check the calendar. I opened a blank spreadsheet on my personal laptop and began sorting names. People I had worked with, trusted, helped through impossible deadlines, saved from crisis meetings. Names, emails, timelines. I wasn't reaching out yet. I was studying the terrain. I knew the company better than any of them. Not just its infrastructure, its people. I knew who still owed me favors, who had quietly forwarded redacted memos during the Devlin acquisition, who once leaned on me at 2 a.m. when a server migration was seconds from collapse. Those people mattered now, not the ones in the glass offices, the ones with backbone. Across the floor, Lolita passed by. Her heels were silent, rubber-soled and meant to tread lightly. She glanced at me once, quickly, then turned away, pretending interest in a chart pinned to the corkboard. She wouldn't speak to me. Not yet. Not until someone told her how to. I didn't care. Let them be confused. Let them think I'd either cracked or surrendered. My silence was louder than any protest. By 9:05, a peculiar stillness fell over the floor. Emails had stopped loading. The company dashboard was frozen mid-refresh. The Verdaxis console was blinking a red timeout symbol. And across the hallway, I could see Ben through the glass of the strategy war room, tapping furiously at his keyboard while a junior analyst hovered, pale-faced. No one came to me. They didn't know they should, and I didn't offer. Instead, I opened a fresh tab and composed a message, short, encrypted, and sent through a secure third-party relay. Not to legal, not to Dylan, to Christoph. Your access may temporarily be frozen. It will self-correct once internal alignment is restored. I recommend discretion until then. Regards, Rose. That was all I sent. Not a warning, not a threat, a courtesy, a reminder. Across the next hour, the quiet started to thrum with something electric. Panic, confusion, whispered strategy. Lolita ducked into a call room. HR looked like they were searching for a protocol that didn't exist. I kept typing. I wasn't hiding. I was gathering. By noon, I had compiled a full map of every employee still in the building who had worked on the Verdaxis proposal, who had witnessed the transition, who had been demoted, overlooked, silenced, every potential ally, every possible witness, and I hadn't spoken a single word, because silence, when held by someone who knows the truth, is terrifying. They had their titles. I had their system. They had their flashy dashboards. I had the pulse beneath the floorboards. And while they stared at frozen screens and tried to blame IT, I stared at my list and started planning. What to rebuild, who to approach, where to squeeze just enough pressure. The storm wasn't coming. I was the storm. The morning began with a burst of fake energy. Lolita walked into the building at 8:02 a.m., wheeling a carbon black suitcase behind her, the kind with a built-in charger and a price tag that screamed, "Promotion bonus." She wore a tailored blazer in corporate navy and heels that clicked with rehearsed confidence. She was going to Paris. Officially, she was leading the final stage of Verdaxis onboarding, an announcement Dylan had posted on the internal bulletin just before midnight, like a king declaring the end of a war he'd never fought. There was even a press photo, Lolita smiling next to a blurred-out dashboard, the caption reading, "Maventech's new integration lead brings fresh perspective to international strategy." I read it over my morning coffee and didn't blink. Across the floor, people clapped when she passed. Not loudly, not sincerely, just enough to be seen. I didn't move. I typed. She caught my eye for a fraction of a second as she rolled by. There was something brittle behind her smile. She hadn't spoken to me once since I'd been reassigned, but I knew what that glance meant. You lost. At 8:50, she left in a company car. At 9:17, the Verdaxis call was scheduled to begin, and at 9:24, the first email landed. From Christophe Devane. To Dylan Mercer, CC, Legal. Ops subject, meeting termination notice. This morning's scheduled integration alignment call has been canceled. As per our contractual terms and internal compliance review, any transition of oversight must be led by the principal architect, Ms. Rose Taylor. No substitute will be accepted. This clause was agreed upon under 94.7c and will be enforced. Any continued attempts to bypass this stipulation will constitute breach of contract. We are pausing all further onboarding activities until Ms. Taylor is reinstated. Regards, Christophe Devane, CEO, Verdaxis International. The silence that followed could have cracked glass. At 9:27, the Slack channels exploded. Jacques strategy, SAC alert. Urgent legal, SUC Verdaxis. Panic. By 9:30, Dylan's assistant stormed past my cubicle. HR followed 5 minutes later, white-faced and wide-eyed. Ben was already locked in his glass office, speaking in fast, clipped bursts to a muted Zoom screen. And I kept typing. I wasn't watching their panic. I was listening to it. The building had changed. The whole floor felt like it was breathing faster, shallow, and desperate. You could hear the weight of realization in every hurried footstep. Rose Taylor wasn't replaceable. She was essential. Because I had built the deal. I had carried it across borders, languages, time zones. I was the reason Verdaxis had agreed to trust a company still run by men who thought branding could outrun substance. And now, the truth had detonated. Lolita never made it past Charles de Gaulle. By the time she landed, the meeting was already dead. Christophe never even left his office. The Paris conference room Maventech had rented sat dark, empty, and paid for. At 11:42, a new message appeared in my inbox. From Dylan Mercer. Subject, private discussion. Please stop by my office at your earliest convenience. Urgent. I stared at it. Didn't click, didn't respond. Instead, I opened my spreadsheet and added a new column. Date of realization. Next to Dylan's name, I typed today's date. Let him sweat, let them all. Because the real power never left the building. It had simply gone quiet. The board meeting was called in a panic. Not the usual kind with catered breakfast and scripted slide decks. This one was held in the war room. 5th floor, soundproofed glass, white walls, and a single long table where decisions were made and scapegoats were sacrificed. I wasn't invited. But I didn't need to be. By noon, half the company knew what was happening. Legal had gone dark. Public relations scrambled to draft a statement that said nothing. Dylan's office door stayed closed, blinds drawn like a confession booth. And Ben? He paced. For once, he wasn't smirking. The Verdaxis fallout was already bleeding into the press. 2.4B deal in jeopardy after executive oversight dispute at Maventech, the headline read. And the internal blame game had begun. By 2 p.m., they were whispering my name again, but not with reverence, with accusation. She's the one who triggered the clause. Did she sabotage it? She must have done this on purpose. But that was the thing about injustice. It always looks for someone to burn instead of someone to blame. And that's when it happened. The war room door opened. A hush fell across the floor, and out stepped someone no one expected to see. Elaine Darrow, senior board member, co-founder of Maventech, and, until this very moment, largely absent from daily operations. Her heels echoed like a gavel. She stopped mid-floor, just far enough from my cubicle that we could lock eyes. Then she said, "To no one and everyone, let me be very clear about what happened." Silence. She turned slowly, eyes sweeping the floor like a laser level. Rose Taylor was not demoted. She was systematically removed. Not because of performance, not because of redundancy, but because leadership, she glanced toward Dylan's closed door, decided she was inconvenient. No one moved. Elaine stepped closer. She negotiated the Verdaxis deal. She authored the system architecture. She protected this company's integrity, while others protected their titles. And they fired her for it. You could feel the shame ripple outward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Clause 94(7)(c) was her safeguard, a legal one, ethical, transparent, and now you're trying to spin a story about sabotage when the truth is she saved you, from yourselves. A sharp breath from someone in legal, a muttered curse from HR. Elaine turned toward me again. "You don't owe them silence, Rose, but I respect how you've used it." I stood, not tall, not proud, just steady. "I didn't sabotage anything," I said finally, voice calm but unmistakable. "I wrote a clause. They didn't read it. That's not revenge. That's neglect." Elaine nodded. "And negligence has consequences." Ben looked like he wanted to vanish. Lolita, now back from France, was frozen mid-step, her bag still slung over one shoulder. And Dylan? Still behind closed doors. Because shame has a way of locking people in. Elaine gave one final look around the floor, then turned and left. No dramatic exit, no echoing words. Just the truth, finally spoken. And suddenly, the silence that had once protected them turned against them. Because now everyone knew. They hadn't just fired a woman, they'd erased a legacy, and now they were the ones disappearing. By Tuesday morning, the silence was gone. In its place came noise, scrambling, spinning, the delicate chaos of people trying to make something broken look intentional. I felt it before I saw it. A shift in tone, the weight of apology masquerading as strategy. They'd tasted what it meant to lose me. Now they were choking on it. The Verdaxis team had halted all activity. Christoph's declaration had reached the board, the legal department, and even leaked to one of our tech investors. A $2.4 billion deal, frozen because the company chose ego over value. The press hadn't gone full firestorm yet, but murmurs were already spreading. Inside the building, it was like watching a dam creak under pressure. People moved quickly, but said little. The same ones who had ignored me for days now offered vague smiles in passing. Some hovered near my door, pretending they had questions about unrelated tasks. They weren't sure if I was back. They didn't know if I'd won. At 10:14 a.m., the answer landed in my inbox. From Dylan Mercer. Subject: Executive Transition Discussion. After internal review and client alignment, we would like to formally extend a reinstatement offer to you, effective immediately. The role: Senior Executive Strategist, Verdaxis Operations. Compensation: $7,000 base. Performance bonuses. Board equity. Full operational autonomy. Direct reporting access to executive leadership. Authority to restructure team as you see fit. We deeply value your leadership and vision, and we hope you'll consider returning to guide this next chapter. I stared at it for a long moment. A week ago, they stripped me of my title, slashed my salary, and shoved me into a windowless cubicle. Now, they wanted me to lead again, with full power, no oversight, and more money than they'd ever offered any strategist. It would have been tempting to click accept, walk back into the fold with applause, wear the crown they'd only now realize they needed to place. But I wasn't interested in crowns. I forwarded the message. To Christophe Devane. Subject: Transition offer. Received the reinstatement package. Before I respond, I'd appreciate your position. His reply came just 21 minutes later. From Christophe Devane. Subject: Confirmation. Our stance remains unchanged. No Rose Taylor, no deal. If Maventech wants Verdaxis, they secure you. This isn't negotiation, it's trust. That was all I needed. Not because I required his validation, but because his conviction echoed what I already knew. The work had never lied. I had never needed PR spin or viral quotes. My value had always been in the blueprints, the timelines, the seamless silence behind every successful integration. Now, for once, someone was saying it out loud. I picked up my phone. Dylan answered on the first ring. Rose! His voice was so chipper, I almost laughed. I hope you saw the offer. I did, I said flatly. Let's talk terms. Of course, absolutely. What would you need from us to move forward? I spoke clearly, slowly, each word sharpened by calm. Autonomy. No funneling through ops. No intermediary approvals. Done. My own budget, my own team. I choose who comes and goes. Of course. Full data access, no obstructions. Anything Verdaxis touches flows through me. Granted. And Dylan? Yes? No headlines, no internal newsletter stories, no staged photos. He hesitated. Understood. I'm not your comeback narrative, I said. I'm your backbone. Start acting like it. There was a pause. Then, softly, you have my word. I ended the call without another word. It wasn't personal. It was structural. By 2 p.m., my name reappeared on the internal systems. This time not as assistant or legacy advisor, but under a new title, Executive Strategist, Autonomous Operations. I smiled at the irony. They hadn't just reinstated me, they'd named the very system I'd been quietly running for years. My first act? Reclaiming my office. Not the one they reassigned to Lolita. I took the top floor suite that had been sitting vacant since the last reorg. The one no one had dared to claim because it had executive conflict history. It didn't matter. I liked its silence. I liked its height. And more importantly, I didn't need anyone's permission. At 4:27 p.m., a Slack message popped up from one of my former team leads. Just 3 words. You're really back, I replied. Not back. Forward. By sunset, I stood at the window, watching the city burn golden below. Same skyline, same office. But everything had changed. Because this time, they didn't own me, I owned myself. It looked like the same contract, same formatting, same pages, same corporate watermark faintly behind each clause like a ghost. But this time, something fundamental had changed. At the center of the cover page, where once had been the Maventech global seal, embossed and dominant, now stood something new. Clean, minimalist, bold, Verdaxis North America. And just beneath that, typed in crisp black letters, Executive Signatory, Rose Taylor, Chief Executive Officer. I stared at it for a long time before lifting the pen. This wasn't just a signature. It was a declaration. The same contract I had once fought to protect. The same agreement they'd tried to push through without me, like I was a cog, not a creator. They had tried to cut me out. Now I was the only name that mattered. The signing took place in a quiet boardroom overlooking the Seine. No press, no cameras, just polished wood, real contracts, and people who understood the difference between titles and worth. Christophe sat beside me, his hands folded, eyes calm but unmissably proud. You were always the core, he said softly, sliding the folder closer. Now it's simply official. The contract had been slightly revised, small adjustments, structural clarifications, but the essence of it, the architecture, unchanged, because it had been perfect the first time. I had made it perfect. I picked up the pen, a real one, Mont Blanc, gold trim, not for the flair, but for the finality. I signed, slowly, deliberately, not just my name, but my presence, my permanence. Rose Taylor, I wrote, then dated it. With that, the contract was no longer a symbol of what they'd taken from me. It became a testament to what they could never hold without me. Christoph signed next. "Welcome, officially, to your future," he said, passing the completed file to legal. There was no champagne. There were no staged photos or meaningless claps. There was just paper, ink, and power. Later that day, while the signed documents made their way to the compliance teams, I sat in my new office, glass-walled, high above the city, the skyline wide open before me. There was no plaque on my desk, no framed mission statement on the wall, just a nameplate on the corner of my desk. Rose Taylor, CEO, that was all. At exactly 4:16 p.m., the news broke. It started as a quiet notification from TechSphere, buried below other headlines. Verdaxis finalizes $2.4 billion contract under new U.S. leadership. Former Maventech executive Rose Taylor named CEO. Then more outlets picked it up. The Verge. Tech Deal of the Year, led by executive ousted weeks before signing. Business Pulse. Ex-strategist turned CEO. Rose Taylor signs deal she originally built. And finally, Maventech's internal Slack lit up. The screenshot of the article appeared in Industry Insight. There were no comments for a full 4 minutes. Then someone posted, "Wait, Rose is CEO now?" And another, "Is this the Verdaxis contract?" Then silence again. Until someone, probably from PR, asked the only question that mattered. Did we just lose the most valuable deal in company history to the person we demoted? No one answered. They didn't need to, because everyone knew. The silence that followed wasn't confusion anymore. It was regret. They had cut me out of the story, and now I owned the whole book. Dylan didn't write. Ben didn't call. Lolita was suddenly on leave. The board issued a bland internal memo celebrating competitive momentum and market diversity, but it was too late. The narrative had left their hands. They hadn't just failed to hold on to me. They'd become a footnote in my rise. As evening fell, I stood by the window of my office, watching the lights flicker on across Paris. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just stood there, still and steady, breathing in the quiet like it was oxygen. They had underestimated me, erased me, replaced me. But they had forgotten one thing. You cannot erase what writes the story, and I had written every line.